Okay, I'm going to talk to you about the second film that we're going to watch in our class. And the second film we're watching is called District 9. It is rated R. It has quite a bit of violence and it can be somewhat disturbing. But from my reading of it, I think the violence is necessary to carry through a lot of the social themes that are going on, especially when we're talking about dehumanization. So be prepared for that. Little bit of foul language, not a lot of sexual content. And I want to tell you a little bit about the film, where it comes from, who produced and directed it, and some of the themes that you might want to be looking for that make it science fiction and that make it a part of the Xeno canon. So, Neil Blomkamp is the director and producer. Blomkamp was born in South Africa, and even though the film was produced almost 10 years after the fall of the apartheid system, that is the major focus of the film, is the apartheid system in South Africa. Some of you may not be familiar with what the apartheid system was, so I'll give you a basic rundown of it. South Africa, an African nation that was colonized by a European nation, and so the people who were in power in that country were all white, and the people who were native to that country were all black. And because of the differences in race, there was what they called an apartheid system, which meant that there was a separation of power, a separation of rights. So anyone who lived in South Africa who was black had fewer rights than the people who lived in South Africa who were white. And there was a lot of what would really be considered dehumanization going on, with the white people who were ruling looking down on the people who are black. So when we get into the film District 9, we find a similar theme, except the differences between human and alien rather than different human races. It's a little bit difficult to talk about the film because we never actually know the name of the non-human race who we're discussing. They're referred to in a derogatory way as prawns, and prawn has to do with what they look like, their actual physical makeup. So kind of think of that as having air quotes around it. It is not a name they chose for themselves. It was a name that human beings imposed upon them. Things to know about how the film works as far as xenofiction goes. It starts with a human perspective, and it starts with one character who is not a very likable character. So watch for what we would think of as dynamic character development, meaning don't assume that just because your main character is unlikable at the beginning that he's going to remain unlikable. There's a great deal of change which goes on in his life and in his perspective throughout the film, and in fact the changes that go on are more than just in his attitude. There are physical changes that go on, and those physical changes help to reinforce some of the Xeno themes in the film. It was very well received critically. It is a film that has very clear, very observable political and social themes going on in it. I think much easier to take apart and work with than something like Black Mirror. And it's really very understandable at the surface level. I'll tell you about some of the things in it that people have called out as being odd or difficult to understand, or maybe even antithetical to the main message of it. One thing is that you have different populations of humans represented within the film, and there is a group of thugs who are portrayed in a way that some have seen as being somewhat racist and somewhat dehumanizing. So that's something to look out for. The question of, does Blomkamp in the process of trying to use xenofiction to alert us to the plight of people who face racial prejudice, does he also include racial prejudice in his own film? I happen to like the film and usually can find ways to explain away his characterization of the negative characters, but also I'm very, very easy to be swayed in the direction of seeing that there is some potential racism going on within the film. Do pay attention to the good human, bad human problem that occurs throughout the entire film, especially since you're dealing with what originally is a bad human. There's not a lot of humor in it, but some humor. What I find fascinating about it as you move through it is the degree to which you can feel empathy for the prawns as we learn more and more about them. If you know Blomkamp's work, you'll know that he also produced the film Chappie. And Chappie is a really, really interesting piece of work. So Chappie follows a law enforcement android. And the android does not have very human-looking features, and yet through very, very brilliant use of CGI, charting his movements, charting his attempt to appear more human, the producers have really done a great job of blurring the lines between human and android. And they've given this android a lot of very human characteristics. And this is something that's come very, very far. If you think back to things like R2-D2 and C-3PO and early android representations, they didn't have very human affects. So if you're interested in what Blomkamp has done, definitely do watch Chappie. You'll find much of the same thing going on with the prawns who you'll see in District 9. The prawns, even though we're not inclined to see them as looking much like us, and they're 100% CGI. They are not based on human forms. Even so, as the film goes on, we become more kindly disposed toward them. So definitely watch it. It's a very entertaining film. I think it's easy to write about. I've had several students write essays about it, pulling out pieces of it. Do participate in the discussion forum, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to say about District 9.